Hey folks, Eric here from TOURNA-MIX, the ultimate mix competition website. I hope you're doing well today. Real quick, if you like mix contests, please check the link below. We host 2 mix contests every single month. It's a lot of fun. Join anytime. Now today we're going to talk about loudness. Now normally loudness is something you probably associate with mastering. And in truth, mastering is the thing that will make your mix loud, okay? It's the final limiter in any mastering chain that boosts the volume of your mix and brings it up to commercial standards. But the trick is, how do we get a nice loud master that actually sounds good? Now, anybody can take a limiter, something like this, and push up the input gain and get a nice loud sound. It's very, very easy to do. But depending on how much limiting you end up with, let's say you're doing 5, 6, 7 dB of limiting, you're probably actually hurting the audio. So while you might be hitting -6 LUFS or something juicy like that, it's not sounding good, okay? And that is a big problem. No one's going to like your mix just because it's loud, okay? So as it turns out, there are some strategies, and luckily they're very straightforward strategies, that we can do during the mix to prepare ourselves for mastering. So if you've been struggling to get a nice loud mix, check out this video. I promise it's going to help you. All right, so I've got a song here that some of you, in fact, many of you probably know. This is one of the free songs that we give away when you subscribe to TOURNA-MIX. So you don't even have to join. You just have to provide your email, and you'll get this song plus 3 others. Now, here's a rough balance of the song with absolutely no mixing. All right, so it's a little country song. And what I'm going to do today is kind of mix this song on the fly real quick and show you some strategies for how to make it nice and loud. So the first thing that I did, let me just select all the tracks here, is just invert the polarity of some of the tracks to make sure they're phase coherent. So that was the bottom organ track and a couple of the drum tracks, the hi-hat, it looks like the top snare and the kick. All right. So, okay, now that that's done, the first step in getting a loud master is making sure that you high pass filter things. This is the one that most of you probably already know, but I added a high pass filter to basically every track here. All right. In some cases, it was, just a simple 30 hertz high pass on the kick. I put 100 hertz, I think, on the vocals, etc. So removing low end is a very important part of getting a loud master because that low sub energy takes up a lot of space, okay, a lot of headroom. So I'm not going to spend any more time on this one because most of you already know what a high pass filter is. So here's the mix with just high pass filtering.
Heading down the back roads, trying to make sense of it all.
All right, there we have it. So the next thing is compression. Now, compression is very important for, getting energy out of your tracks, creating density, etc. And it does help with, getting a loud master because if things aren't compressed nicely, your final limiter is going to have to work really hard. But before I turn on these compressors, and you can see I've got just a wall of AR1s here. See these guys here? The only one that's not an AR1 is on the mix bus, and that is this guy here. I use that for my bus compression. But I literally just threw AR1 on every track without even tweaking the parameters. I just literally instantiated it on every track. So I'll show that in a second. But before we get to that, there's something you can do prior to compression, just to make sure that your compressors are happy and that you don't have any random peaks poking out all over the place. Let me show you a perfect example. Here's the acoustic guitar, and if I zoom in, you'll notice a really even performance for the most part, but just a couple of random peaks here, this one being the worst of them that poke out. Now, from a listening and musical perspective, these little peaks don't matter at all. You don't hear them as peaks, right? It's not like all of a sudden the acoustic guitar gets super loud and sounds bad. That's not really how it works. But from the perspective of trying to get the loudest possible master we can that still sounds good, I'm going to throw a limiter on before our compression. So let me just show you how this looks. You'll notice the limiter isn't working at all, and then all of a sudden it is. See, no limiting, and then a little small amount of limiting just on that peak. So this is going to catch the highest peaks and just even out our performance before compression. It's totally transparent. You'll never know it was there. It just, again, controls those random peaks. And this is what the whole theme of this video is going to be about. So, look, here's another example on the pedal steel. We have these fairly even performance, but a few peaks just coming out of nowhere. So I put a limiter on and we'll see no limiting and then a little blip here. Watch this. See, that's probably 6 dB of limiting on that one little peak. Now, will this matter really in the end? Well, I couldn't really say, but I just think that it's the kind of thing that's a good habit to get into, just limiting all of the little peaks prior to compression that poke out. Now, on this piano track, it probably wasn't totally necessary. I did add a limiter. Okay, you can see it hits this one peak here. That's the only thing it did in the whole song, I think. It might have hit this peak 1 dB here, okay? But you get the idea, okay? We're just taking care of those small peaks that kind of aren't really necessary. Now, here's a good example with the kick. You can see if we zoom in on the kick, we've got a fairly erratic performance. You've got some peaks that are way up high and, a lot of them are kind of around this level. Now, with transient material like drums, I prefer clippers to limiters. So I think every mixer needs a clipper in their toolkit. So I'm using the Kazrog here, but you can use absolutely anything. So the amount of clipping is shown down here. So keep your eye here and we'll just let this run. You can see that was 2.4 dB of clipping. If I click this to get rid of it, we'll see no clipping on some hits, right? No clipping, no clipping. And then on this big hit here, we're going to get about 4 dB. 3.2 dB, okay? So this is a good example of where using a clipper prior to compression might be something to consider, okay? And then once your compressor is on, it's not going to get hit with those big spikes out of nowhere. All right, so that is limiting and clipping prior to compression. It's not something you have to do. I'm just going to turn them all back on here. It's not something you have to do, but I believe it does help in getting a loud master. All right, so next is compression. So again, I just threw these AR1s on every track without even really tweaking them at all. Okay, the only one I tweaked was my parallel compression, which we'll get to in a second. So let me just play the mix now with the compression.
Roads trying to make sense of it all.
I turn them off.
Waiting for a sign from the sky, but it just don't fall.
All right, so it got a lot louder there, but let me just show you, like on the lead vocal here.
Making up the lost time, trying to gain miles on my life.
I'm not even compressing hard at all. Again, I did this really, really quickly. I just got about 5 dB of compression on every single track, okay? But it really, really helps to kind of glue the whole song together and tame some peaks, bring up the lower level information, and just make things sound better. So compression is a huge part of this, but it's not going to be our main focus today because it's actually the clipping and limiting that I believe is more important. All right, so we've high-passed out the low-end rumble. We've got some limiters and clippers doing a little bit of gentle clipping and limiting prior to our compression. Then I just threw on these compressors, right, without even really thinking about it. And now we're going to get to maybe the most important thing, which is post-compression limiting and clipping. So when it comes to drums or anything that's transient in nature, you're going to want to throw a clipper on them. Now, clippers, we're not going to get into sort of what a clipper is today. We just don't have time for it. But clippers essentially just lop off the top of your signal. So if I have this kick here, let me just play this. You can see 0.7 dB of clipping. Whoops, I'm actually on the snare. We'll just stick with that. We're up to almost a dB here. And then on certain hits, like for example, this over here, let's see what this does. You can see 4 dB of clipping there. So what this means is that our peak value has been lowered by 4 dB, which is profound. But the interesting thing is that the sound hasn't changed. So here's the on-off switch for this plugin. If I toggle this on and off, you won't hear a difference in sound. That's off. That's on. They sound identical. So it's a fascinating tool. I consider clippers kind of like utility tools, like de-essers. They don't really do anything to the sound unless they're pushed really hard. I mean, they can certainly be used creatively, but the way I'm using it here is for transparent peak reduction and nothing more. I'm actually trying to not change the sound, okay? Now, another option that you could use instead of a clipper is some type of saturation plugin. I'm using Omega A here, okay? And if we, cycle over a certain range here, let me just turn it off. Let's see what our actual snare peak value is. Okay, minus 7.5 on that little fill. So if I turn on Omega A, see, now our peak value is at minus 10.5. So this plugin, this saturation plugin, has clipped this signal by 3 dB. Okay, so that's amazing. Now we could even use both. We could use K-clip and Omega A. Let's see how that goes. It's actually about the same in that case, but so you could choose one or the other or do some combination of both. But the idea here is to lower the peak levels. So let me, same with the kick, right? We've got K-clip here. This one was actually prior to compression, and I never added another one. I'm going to actually slide this guy. Actually, I'll just start a new one here. All right, so I've pulled up another instance of this Kazrog clipper on the kick. So remember, we had one before the compression, right, that did about 3 dB of clipping before the compression, but I'm going to add one after as well. Let's do this in real time. These two are linked. The input and output are linked. I'm just going to push this down until I start seeing some clipping. All right, there's 1.5, there's 2 dB. Again, if I turn it off, totally transparent, you don't hear any change in sound. Turn that back on. Great. So now I've clipped before and after the compressor. All right, so that's something you might want to consider as well. Sometimes people ask me, where in the chain should the clipper go? It can go at the start or at the end or both, whatever seems to make the most sense to you. All right, so I'm going to go through and turn back on all these clippers here. This is the toms, okay? So I also clip the toms. You should be clipping every single drum shell, especially if you need a loud master. So for example, this tom here, you know, if I zoom in on it here and just create a little cycle, without the clipper on, we're peaking at minus 5.7. With the clipper on, peaking at minus 9.6. So 4 dB, you can see that here, 4 dB of clipping, but totally transparent. All right, so you get the idea, right? We're using limiters and clippers to lower the peak levels of all of our tracks. And trust me, this pays huge dividends when we get down to this final limiter here. You can see on the bass, I had a limiter before the compressor doing a little bit of limiting and also one afterwards. Here's the 2. So it'd be like this kind of thing where we have the compressor in the middle, right? And then a limiter on either side of it. Let me just play a bit of the bass and watch that. So you can see the one before the compressor is just hardly working. Okay, then we have some compression and some final limiting. All right, so let me move on now and show you some other places we can lower peak values. So even though we've clipped all of our drum shells, I mean, I didn't clip the overheads. I don't usually touch them. I didn't clip the hi-hats. For me, usually I'm just clipping the shells themselves, so the toms, the kick, and the snare. But you can also clip the drum bus. So let me pull up this K clip that's on the drum bus. So let me just solo the drum bus. You can see there's actually no clipping happening. It's probably the kind of thing I set up where it's only hitting certain parts. Let me go to like a loud section over here. Let's see what this little area is doing. Yeah, there we go. You can see 2.7 dB. So I don't like to clip drum bus too hard because it can make the cymbals sound lo-fi and it can even distort the kick a little bit, but you'd be amazed how much clipping you can get away with on drum bus. So even though we've already clipped the kick, the snare and the toms, right? I'm also clipping the entire kit as a whole. Now, an alternative is also to use, again, a saturation plugin like Black Box, something like this, right? So if I cycle over a certain range here, let me turn Black Box off. Let's watch our drum bus here. All right, minus 5.6. Let's turn Black Box on. There you go. Minus 8.7. We've bought another 3 dB of headroom. Incredible. And yet the sound doesn't really change. Let me toggle it on and off here. This is on. Right? I mean, it's a pretty transparent sound. You know, saturation plugins like this is like a tube saturator. They're not going to be as transparent as a clipper. I find clippers are really, really clean. Like until you push them hard, you barely know they're on. Whereas saturation plugins like this can add more vibe and more color. So it's kind of up to you which one you use. Maybe you want to use both, okay? You'll notice I don't even have a drum bus compressor on. That would also sort of help with gaining some density. But yeah, this is also an amazing tool and there's many of them for lowering peaks. So I'm going to leave that guy on. Let me just get rid of this K clip and I'll just put this Black Box up here. All right, and then we've got our drum crush. So this is a parallel compression track that's receiving signal from, let me just turn these sends on, from our kick, our snare bus, and a little bit of overheads. Let's listen to this. Okay, I'm using AR1 to smash it. This is the only AR1 instance that I tweaked at all. I just added more compression. But why don't we also clip it? Because after all, this is part of our drum sound and we want to keep our peaks down. So let me turn on K-clip. You can see here, it's not clipping very hard. Just 1 dB. It might be hitting 3 dB in certain parts. Okay, but that's just another way that I'm keeping my peaks down. Now, one final thing to show you with drums here. I've got my drum bus, which is right here, and my parallel crush. And both of those are outputting to my all drums auxiliary over here. And this over here, I'm going to actually limit very, very gently. Watch this. This is the limiter that's affecting both my drum bus and my parallel crush. And you can see it's there more than anything as a safety net. We just want to make sure, like maybe on a certain tom fill or a loud snare hit, that we don't have any random peaks that are going to cause this final limiter on my mix bus any trouble. So you can see it's barely limiting. Right? It's just doing like hardly anything. But again, it's helping our overall cause here, which is to get a loud master. Now, these vocals were pretty, like, either very well sung or maybe compressed on recording day, so they didn't really need much in the way of limiting prior to compression. Sometimes you get really wild spikes in a vocal, and it can be handy just to lop them off with a limiter. In this case, I just added L1 after my compression. So you can see here, L1.
Telling all my old friends that I have left, how I lost
Just catching the odd peak here and there. Nothing too crazy. L1 is very, very transparent to my ear. I really, really like it. I'm going to turn those back on for the other vocals. And there we have it. We've gone through. Oh, and by the way, this is the all instruments auxiliary. Let's listen to that. Okay. So I've actually put a limiter on that as well. Let's watch that work. So that's actually interesting. You notice how it was doing nothing, and then it did one little, peak reduction, and then a big one, -4. Let's watch that again. Right, but you don't really hear it, especially like if I was limiting this instrument bus -4 dB of reduction all the time, like constant reduction, you'd really probably hear that. But when it's a really momentary spike like that, you can get away with pretty high levels and not really hear it. So that's another way that I'm controlling peaks, okay, on the all instruments bus and all drums bus. Okay, so I've shown all of that. Now, what is relevant about this is if I select all of these tracks and remove all of the clippers and limiters that were before my compressor, okay, you can see that everything before AR1 has been muted. All right, and everything after, let me just mute all these limiters and clippers. Let me just pick a little region here. Let me maybe go to the verse actually. So let's just cycle here. If I play this audio without the limiters and clippers, I'm going to also mute this saturation plugin. Let's just hear it.
heading down the back roads trying to make sense of it all.
All right, sounds pretty good. Let me turn them all back on, and it's not going to sound any different. Let me just turn this guy on too.
Waiting for a sign from the sky, but it just don't fall. Making up the lost time, trying to gain miles of my life.
They sound almost identical, and yet I didn't really show it on the mix bus here, but we're going to get a lot less peaks here on the mix bus, and I'm going to show that in a second with the limiter. Now, another place you can clip your mix is on mix bus. So I have Kazrog here. Oh, sorry, that's not the one I meant to show. Let me just get rid of that for a second, turn it off. Is this guy here, right? So if I let the chorus play.
I don't want to be a fool flying into the hands of a window pane.
You can see another 2.4 dB of clipping on the master. Now that's a little more than I normally would do. I sort of have this rule with myself, like 1.5, maybe 2 dB tops. Okay, so that was just set up a little clumsily. Although I didn't hear any negative repercussions, but you want to be careful not to clip things too hard, or otherwise you might get distortion. So this is another area you can clip, is right on your mix bus, and this is, I think, a very good strategy. But one I like even more is saturation. So I'm going to go back to this Vertigo plugin here. And so if I cycle over a region here, let me turn this saturation off and just see where our peak levels are. So watch over here.
Heading down the back roads trying to make sense.
Right, so -2.8. Let me turn this guy on, and this is basically adding tube saturation and transformer saturation. Let's see what we got now.
Heading down the back roads trying to make sense of it all.
So it went from -2.8 to -5.1, and not only is the sound fairly transparent, I think it's a better sound. I think this is adding some polish and vibe to the mix. So we've bought ourselves like almost another 3 dB of headroom here prior to our limiter. Let me just toggle this on and off a few times.
Waiting for a sign from the sky, but it just don't fall. Making up the lost time.
For the most part, it's very transparent, and that's kind of what I want. I didn't want a distorted sound. I just wanted to maybe perk up the mix a little bit and add some tube warmth and love, but mostly I just wanted to hack down those peaks. Now let me just turn on some reverb here. This thing is so dry. Let's hear that verse again.
Heading down the back roads trying to make sense of it all. Waiting for a sign from the...
Awesome. Now, as you may have noticed, this is a no EQ mix. The only EQ I've done is the high pass filters that we set up earlier. So I think it's sounding pretty good. That might be another lesson in and of itself, is sometimes you don't need that much EQ. All right, so let me just get rid of this K clip because I'm going to use the saturator instead here. Now let's get to some limiting. So I'm going to pull this limiter up here, okay? And because things are about to get much louder, I'm going to actually turn on this gain plugin and reduce things by 9 dB after the fact. Okay, so I'm going to turn that on here. So let me turn this limiter on, all right? And let's just watch the limiting for a second.
That I know, but I just can't find. I don't wanna be a fool flying into the hands of a window.
All right, so you can see about 3 dB of limiting, which for me is about as high as I like to go. I'm even going a little higher than I normally do. Let me actually pull that down by 0.3 here. So plus 8.5 dB of gain. Let's just check that out again real quick.
8 miles of my life.
And what I'll do is pull up this multimeter, okay, and see how loud this master is right now.
Wanting for a feeling that I know, but I just can't find. I don't wanna be a fool flying into the hands of a window pane. Telling all my old friends that I have left, how I lost my.
All right, so we have kind of an integrated loudness of -8 LUFS. It's actually about -7 LUFS in the chorus, and we're only doing about 2.5 to 3 dB of limiting. So to me, this is more than loud enough for this kind of song. I mean, since I'm not mixing this for real right now, I don't have to mix it for anyone in particular. But like if, the producer of this song wanted it at -7, I just hit that. And I'm only using 3 dB of limiting, which doesn't really degrade the audio all that much. It's actually very transparent. I think things are sounding pretty good. And, but if I were to mute all of these other plugins here, check this out here. Like if I were to mute all of our utility plugins, so all the limiters, okay, all the clippers, let's get rid of those. The saturation, let me get rid of this saturation guy here. Yeah, this guy. Now, we're probably going to have a master that's the same, loudness, but let's just check out the limiting now. So here we go. Let's take it from that chorus again.
Be a fool flying into the hands of a window pane. Telling all my old friends that I have left, how I lost.
Right now, that doesn't sound terrible because this limiter is very transparent, but it does sound worse. It's the same loudness, right? But our peaks here in the limiter are being smashed down to like -7 sometimes. I think it would probably hit -8 or 8 dB of gain reduction in certain sections. And I'm not comfortable with that. Let's hear that again and see if we can hear any type of like negative impact in the sound.
I don't wanna be a fool flying into the hands of a window pane. Telling all my old friends that I have left, how I lost my way.
A bit. It's not terrible. It's not as bad as I actually thought it was going to be. I thought we might see some really kind of nasty distortion, or maybe the drums would sound just awful. It doesn't sound bad, but I don't think it sounds as good as when we have all these nice utility plugins working for us. Let me just turn those back on. Go back here and check it out. Listen to it one more time.
I don't wanna be a fool flying into the hands of a window pane. Telling all my old friends that I have left, how I lost my way. How I lost my.
All right, let's leave it at that. I think the idea is pretty clear. We have some really, really easy strategies here for getting louder mixes or louder masters, right? It starts with high pass filtering, which we all know about, right? Then we have compression, which we are probably all doing already. But prior to compression, sometimes it's a good idea to use limiters or clippers, okay? Clippers tend to be better on drums, transient stuff, snaps, claps, things like that. Sometimes it's a good idea to throw that on before your compressor to kind of even out the signal a bit. And then it's always a good idea, especially on drums, to clip down your signals as much as you can without hurting the sound. It's also great to use saturation, right? Saturation might even be a vibier way of getting your peaks down. You have to decide for yourself. These are kind of the tricks that I use, and I know a lot of mixers do this. You've also got your group tracks, right, which you can maybe gently limit. Be careful not to overdo it, right? You don't want to go too nuts. Remember, I was only doing like maybe about half a dB on my drums. You see, right? barely touching it because I've already done all this other stuff to the shells, right? And the drum bus. And then don't forget about mix bus, right? We've got a compressor going here, which I didn't show, but that's okay. Like this guy was doing a little bit of compression for us. Okay. Then we have some saturation, which was lowering the peaks by about 3 dB, right? And then we have our final limiter, which only had to do between 2 and 3 dB of limiting. All right. So that's my kind of approach for getting a loud master. If you're having to do 6, 7, 8 dB of limiting on your mix to get it down up to commercial standards, you're probably not doing enough of this stuff. Okay. So try incorporating that into your next mix. Have fun. Happy mixing. We'll talk soon.